Yeah, so I guess I'll just kind of start by briefly going over the readings that we have assigned this week, which has been chapters 9 through 13. So that is Scylla and Charybdis, Wandering Rocks, and what was the 11th one? Sirens, Cyclops, and Nausicaa. And there's a lot more formal experimentation going on here. Scylla and Charybdis is probably the least experimental in that regard in terms of form. It's just this kind of Socratic back and forth amongst Stephen and friends, talking about authorship and talking about the nature of fatherhood and sonhood and um, what is the relationship of the artist to his art. But then Wandering Rocks is where um, things start to get a little interesting because in Wandering Rocks, we have a series of different narrators which are kind of sequentially wandered through. This episode is all about errancy, and we have this sense that we don't have that stable narrative viewpoint that we may have had in the beginning. With the stream of consciousness, we've been talking about how depending on who is the subject of the stream of consciousness, so whether that's Stephen or Bloom, that's going to vary how the stream of consciousness manifests itself, right? What are the psychological tendencies? What are the phenomenological um, kind of generalities that we see manifested in this stream of consciousness? Well, in Wandering Rocks, episode 10, that kind of gets jumbled about such that we are basically being primed to take the narrator as a function of the space that they inhabit, the discourse that we find them in. And we have 19 different narrators in Wandering Rocks, and we get them sequentially separated by these little paragraph breaks. This is what they look like in my Gabler edition. They may look different in your edition, but I've actually went through like this is number two, and then here's number three. So I actually went in and numbered them because it just helps to be able to see them. But these 19 different narrators give us all sorts of different takes on a variety of events for various reasons, both mundane and banal, and also somewhat relevant to the content that's came before. And then Sirens. Sirens is really interesting because Sirens is all about sound, and it's all about the thematic development of a lot of themes and motifs that have been kind of jiggling about. One of them being this jingle, jingle, jaunted jingling, coin rang, clock clacked, right? We've got this jingling motif that we got at the beginning of Bloom's section, that is chapter 4, and it's the jingle of Molly's bed. And that jingle sound will keep coming back to signal to Bloom memories of Molly and also Blazes Boylan. And we see that throughout Sirens. And Sirens is basically the height of really outside of the Circe episode 15 of Bloom thinking about his affair or with Boylan's affair with Molly. And he gradually increases in sort of emotional and psychological intensity as we go through this chapter. And it basically rises and rises and rises and rises. And we get this moment of extreme tension where he is imagining what Boylan is doing to Molly at his home right now. And this is sort of like our dominant seventh chord in music. It's our moment of greatest tension before we get this release where Bloom basically descends into, oh, all is lost. It's happened. It's probably passed by now. Boylan and Molly have probably done their thing, and the episode kind of closes out for various reasons. Also, another important kind of motif, and again, I'm just kind of generalizing. We'll go back and touch whatever we want to, but we also have the tap of the blind man's cane and Boylan on Molly's door. So we have these motifs kind of bridging different contexts of the context that Bloom is in and the imagined context of Bloom's home. And then one of my favorite episodes in the whole book is the Cyclops episode. This is episode 12. And episode 12 gives us a new take on narration in the context of Ulysses, which is that of the unreliable narrator. Because we have this mystery narrator who is at the pub that Bloom and friends find themselves at, and we have this citizen, as he's called. And the citizen is a Irish Republican, he is a nationalist, he's bigoted, and he is one-eyed. He's narrow-minded, hence the Cyclops parallel in the Odyssey. And there are basically 33 different parodies of various sizes that intersperse throughout the goings on of this chapter. And they give us all sorts of stylistic variation on the content being expressed. And it is directly relevant to and connected to what comes before and after it. It just oftentimes can be hard to tell. I'll give you an example of one that's my favorite. It is the 25th. In terms of line numbers, which I don't know if your edition has line numbers, mine has line numbers in the margins. It's around line number 1350, but it's the 25th of these parodies, and it's a parody of the Lord's Prayer. They believe in Rod, the Scourger Almighty, creator of hell upon earth, and in Tacky Jar, the son of a gun, who was conceived of unholy boast, born of the fighting navy, suffered under rump and dozen, was scarified, flayed, and curried, yelled like bloody hell. The third day he arose again from the bed, steered into haven, sitteth on his beam end till further orders, whence he shall come to drudge for a living and be paid. And, this is, we believe in God, and you've got Pontius Pilate, right? Jesus is being sacrificed by Pontius Pilate. So we've got all of this stuff, the form of the Lord's Prayer being used here to talk about the British and their colonial crimes against the Irish. So, right, they believe in Rod. This is corporal punishment, the Scourger Almighty, creator of hell upon earth. So it's the British Army, and we're getting this Irish Republican perspective of the, extreme injustices done to Ireland by the British Empire manifested in a parody. And there are all sorts of parodies that happen in this chapter. Um, Kind of the most important event that's happening is Bloom basically standing up for himself because they get into this conversation about nationhood. This is in many ways thematically parallel to the second episode, which was Stephen talking about nationhood for various reasons with Mr. Deasy. And Bloom basically has to talk about what is a nation, does he have a nation or not? And he goes into this kind of uproarious fervor about how Jewish people are persecuted all around him, even still at this very moment, referring to his compatriots around him who are, continually castigating him for various reasons. And he eventually leaves and decides to go on his way. And what does he do when he goes on his way? Well, that is what Nausicaa is about. In Nausicaa, he ends up on the beach and he sees Gertie McDowell, this girl, who he ends up masturbating to in the bushes. And that's super simplistic. Nausicaa is all about the portrayal of women and about the sort of consumer mentality that male culture often has towards women. It's also about the female spectacle and whatnot. And that's basically the long and the short of the chapters that we've been looking at this week. And this has been a lot of reading, a lot more shifts happening from chapter to chapter. So I'm curious, what are we thinking? Is there any kind of points of interest that really immediately stick out to you that you want to talk about or questions that you have?
I got to read the one with literature, the one
Mm,
about Hamlet,
yeah,
right? I think
yeah,
it's the first one.
yeah.
Yeah, and it seemed quite accessible actually. So I think
Mhm.
I got the gist of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of didn't get whose perspective is it? Like, is it Mulligan comes at one point,
Hmm.
but I get the impression that it shifts somehow from when he comes, then it shifts, and there's another voice which is called what's it called? The omniscient narrator.
Right, right, right.
How do they call it?
I remember what you're talking about, but I don't remember what the arranger maybe?
The arranger, yeah, 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 yeah. I think about him kind of like I if you know Freud a bit,
Hmm.
it's the contribution of the ego
Hmm.
when when the dreams are formed. There's this mechanism of secondary revision, he calls it, in the interpretation of dreams, and it's kind of like it gives a coherence to dreams into such a way that it resembles our daily perceptions.
Hmm.
Maybe this is what the arranger brings, kind of uh,
Yeah.
a consistent
Yeah.
narration, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're totally right because one of the things that sort of upsets what's going on in Ulysses here in this ninth chapter, Scylla and Charybdis, is we've basically been presuming that Stephen is the son and Bloom the father. But Stephen seems to be contesting this by saying that the artist is his own father, that he basically invents his own forefathers. Um, and by doing that, he can sort of break out of the confines of who came before him and can achieve some kind of liberty. So we're basically recontesting these categories of fatherhood and sonhood. And father is the begetter and son the begotten. And he says at one point, where is this great passage about fatherhood?
Yeah, he said something like you cannot be a father because father is basically a function, a symbolic somehow relationship, right?
Yes, yes, here it is. So this is around line 840, and I don't exactly know. All the page numbers are different. He says, fatherhood, in the sense of conscious begetting, is unknown to man. It is a mystical estate, an apostolic succession, from only begetter to only begotten. On that mystery, and not on the Madonna which the cunning Italian intellect flung to the mob of Europe, the church is founded and founded irremovably because founded like the world, macro and microcosm, upon the void, upon incertitude, upon unlikelihood. And he keeps going on. I think this is a really fascinating passage.
Yeah, it somehow it got me with it's similar to Lacan actually, like the name of the father, you know?
Yeah.
It's like the world is kind of arranged through this symbolic what you call it I can't find the word.
Yeah. I mean, I think
um,
you're totally right because the father literally becomes a name here. It becomes this symbol of begetting, of origin, right? Of the Holy Father and whatnot, of the ancestors that we owe our artistic duty to. So it literally becomes a name that Stephen is trying to contest.
yeah, and I think he had this same dilemma in Portrait of the Artist, right?
Yeah.
With the consubstantiality,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because I think one of the and I'm curious what y'all think about Stephen's theory here, because on the one hand, Stephen is supposed to be a liberating, sort of like Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost. He is the emblem of sort of anarchic rebellion against the Givens. And yet, on the other hand, he is one-eyed in his own ways. He is idealistic, utopian, sort of narrow-minded. And I feel like this chapter is really kind of trying to figure out which one of those should we subscribe to.
I was going to say about you were talking about the absence of the father, and Bloom is quite absent from that chapter.
Hmm.
But I think he does remain the father because especially in the other Hamlet has got its detailed thoughts about Hamlet in this chapter, but it's still represented throughout the book. We've talked about the graveyard, and also just Bloom being the wandering kind of father. It's very parallels are still there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because one
Very
thing,
interesting though what Vlad was saying.
yeah. Because I mean, one thing that's sort of polar opposites about Stephen and Bloom is Stephen seems to live by a spirit of renunciation. The renunciation of where he came from, of who he owes duties and loyalties to, of the givens that would supposedly constrain him. But Solomon, what you're saying is making me think that, you know, if he is only ruled by this spirit of renunciation, then in an important way, he's still ruled by what he renounces. He's still ruled by the fatherhood he claims he doesn't need, that he claims he is superseded. And Bloom sort of acts as this non-negation where Bloom just kind of wanders around. He is avoiding Molly, so he is negating his own things. He is trying to escape from his own givens, but he has a different kind of sense of wandering errancy, partially because he's not intellectually, um, you know, exacting in the same way that Stephen is.
We're really into like the weeds of the book here as well with these chapters. There's too much to talk about really as we're
Yeah,
already kind of
yeah,
conscious of. But
yeah.
um, something which hit me just on this read, like I've just for context, I've not read the whole thing, but I'm a massive Ulysses fan, and I know it back to front. And Sirens is I've been trying to crack Finnegan's Wake. I still enjoy it, but just I do so much secondary reading, and then when I go to read it, it's just still
Hmm.
so difficult to understand what's going on. But
Mm,
Sirens, the start. So I know you love Finnegan's Wake, and it's really cool. But
mm,
the start of Sirens is very kind of what you think about how it gets very close to the kind of
yeah,
the wake and the start of Sirens, particularly the overture.
yeah. I mean, that's certainly a good point because they're right there. We do have this kind of whatever page and a half of overture before our kind of fugue actually starts rolling, and it's this sort of exposition, but without this concrete sense of what are our themes? Who are our characters? Where are we? Where in the name of time and space, as he says in Finnegan's Wake? Um, we just get these sort of musical blip, 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 and we're sort of like, okay, what do I do with this? Seems to be some sounds, pwee, little wind-piped wee. It's like digestion. And then we've got a ooh, like a fart. Um, all sorts of random sounds here that are punctuating how we come into this chapter.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. May I go a little bit into because
Yeah,
I've read Ulysses many times before,
go for it.
and revisiting it, I feel that I realized something about the nature of Joyce and the book as a whole through
Mm,
episode 9, Scylla and Charybdis.
mm,
First off, I love this chapter because it's like there's such a movement and like kinetic energy between all
mm,
the different personalities in the room. The writing is so playful and fun. I just
mm.
find this a really all these chapters in this from 9 to 13 are really fun
Yeah,
reads for me.
yeah.
Um, but what I found rereading Stephen's theory, because I was thinking I had never like fully cracked what I felt the theory meant to me,
Hmm.
but referencing it in the context of Joyce and his life,
Mm,
and Stephen's attitude, because you see Stephen throughout the whole chapter, like slowly lose faith and steam in what he's even saying. He's like, what the
Yeah.
hell are you getting at? It's like, I'm
Yeah.
getting somewhere. And then when he's asked if he believes in this theory, he promptly says, no, I
Yeah.
don't. Right. Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, you see the theme of the one person as the all in all, as a
Mm.
very much a recurring idea throughout Joyce. And what I feel he's experiencing here from my own interpretation is
Yeah.
kind of like this battle or this challenge of the essential versus like the egoic.
Mm.
You kind of see how throughout his work, he clearly has the sense of a something greater. Like there's a line in Portrait of the Artist where I think he says something like, he wishes to pierce through the significant heart of everything.
Mhm.
And I think that you can very much see that in Joyce as an artist. It's definitely a part of his motivation.
Mm.
And also the application of art to life and like how, because that's another big theme of fitting into Wake 2 with Shem,
Mhm.
is the idea of like taking the shit of life, so to speak, and making something high out of it.
Mm.
And how can we apply the lessons of a Shakespeare or any of these other characters or any of these other great works of art to the living of life? And I think that for Stephen, this is a very deep, like existential quandary that he's having.
Yeah.
Like the contrast of the shit of life and these people and actually living in alignment with his values, right? And I think that what you see with Stephen in this chapter is not necessarily the cessation of belief in his own theory, but a sort of greater disconnection with the literary scene of Ireland as a whole, and a dissociation with literature as a sort of social value game, or again, an egoic thing. Like I think that he wants to pierce into something more essential, which again, reflecting on Ulysses in general and what the point of the book is,
Mm.
I find it really interesting that this was sort of his answer to that. We see in episode 10, Buck Mulligan and oh god, what's the other character's name? They're talking over tea, and they say like, he says he's going to write. Stephen is going to write the next great Irish novel. Say give him 10 years, and then 10 years later, from the timeline of when this book starts, that's when Joyce starts writing Ulysses,
Mm.
right? So within the story, he's clearly foreshadowing his artistic intentions and reflecting back on Shem from
Mm.
Finnegan's Wake, the Shem, the forger, right?
Yeah.
In Portrait of the Artist, he says, I want to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. And then
Mm.
you have Shem in
I never
Finnegan's
caught
Wake
that.
as the forger, the faker, the artifice,
Yeah.
right? And what I find really interesting is that Ulysses, I feel in Joyce's truest intention is meant to be like an absolute mirror to life,
Mm-hmm.
whilst also fully acknowledging and playing with the inherent limitations of art
Yeah.
as a secondary creation of life, right?
Yeah.
Or as its own unique experience. You see both parody, like through Cyclops, and basically almost every chapter of this book has some kind of parody and some kind of derision in it.
Mm.
Yet it's also very much like an affirmation and a celebration of all these things. And what you guys were just talking about with Steven's relationship with negation kind of clicked that for me as well, because I feel that the thing that Steven is missing at this point in his life that a later Joyce perhaps would grow to embrace through a character such as Bloom and later in the story Molly is
Mm.
a true sense of affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Like Steven is so disconnected, and yet he really wants to be, like he wants to live life fully, but he's like very lost in
Mm-hmm.
the traumas of growing up in Ireland at that time with his family and his mother. But
Yeah.
What's
within
really
all that,
funny, but
oh, go ahead.
what's really funny is what we're doing right now. You're talking about Joyce in the book, and Stephen is talking about Shakespeare in Hamlet.
Yeah.
So it's like we're doing the same thing, just and it's
Yeah.
true, it's true that we're talking about Joyce trying to find a father, but his real father in a way is also in Ulysses.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, in is it Patrick Deadless? Paddy Stephen's father,
Simon.
Simon. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the interesting things, we're talking about affirmation is I think Joyce is at a literary crossroads where you're right, Blair, he's trying to think about art as artifice that, as Aristotle would say, and he's written a whole essay on this, imitates nature. And this doesn't mean, and Joyce clarifies this doesn't mean that art is a copy, a secondary version of that nature, which is primary, because that would make all art basically at best derivative. It would at best be a negation of what it represents because it could never be what it represents. Joyce insists that art acts like nature, that it imitates it in the form of action, not in the form of trying to represent it in some sort of unmediated wholeness. And this really is the crux of Scylla and Charybdis because we can see that he's sprinkling theological stuff throughout here, right? He's a formless spiritual, Father, Word, and Holy Breath, all Father, the heavenly man, he sos Christos. And he keeps going and talking about all of these different ideas and all of these different schematized, formalized ways of knowing. And, with him saying that he doesn't believe his theory, I think the point here is that he's basically rejecting this idea of belief, this idea that he has to have some firm, sedimented scheme that he believes before he goes and lives, basically.
That is really beautiful. That actually, yes, because another aspect of this that I was thinking too is the idea of the point or the message of Ulysses, right?
Mm,
Joyce, I believe, at some point said that the worst thing that could happen is that people think that there's a moral to Ulysses, right? Like
mm,
he stated, there isn't one serious line in this book, which is
mhm,
really interesting. And without spoiling anything for those who haven't finished the book, there is, um, I think one could probably guess, not a sort of neat sense of resolution to
mhm,
most of the subjects brought up here. But going back to the idea of Joyce and Stephen as people who want to create the forge in the smithy of their soul, uncreated conscience of their race. I think that what Joyce saw as the highest thing he could do with art is to represent life through himself.
mm,
And I think that his sense of um, his, I guess, values, so to speak, that involve the empowerment, or I guess, I don't know if empowerment is the right word, but
mm.
giving a voice to the individual.
Yeah.
You see in Finnegan's Wake and this book many characters given voices that I think in literature at that time had really not been given a voice. Most of these things, like the obscenities of life and the kind of raw ugliness of life, are things that before Joyce were not really touched upon, and especially not in such a candid way.
Yeah.
Um, but it was the idea that affirming life exactly as it is without the need for a resolution, but rather just simply allowing one to experience the kind of the gallery of all these different kinds of humans who existed at this time. That
Mm,
in and of itself was enough of a justification, enough of a point for
mm,
the book to exist. Like there's a quote where he talked about, if this book is too obscene to pass through the censors, then life is too obscene to live.
mhm,
And also with Finnegan's Wake, at a dinner party, I believe, during the release of the book, he was talking with the people at the table, and he was saying, well, actually, it's you who's written this book, and
mhm,
you, and you, and you, right? You see this great love for humanity,
mhm,
and at the same time, genuine cynicism
mhm.
and sort of like honest critique of everything that Ireland was, and perhaps that the human is in general. So I
Yeah.
think that the book functions as both an affirmation of humanity and a recognition of, I think, what he also at some point called this irreducible antagonism that
Mhm.
exists, that he saw existed within
Yeah.
humanity, right?
Yeah, and I mean that exists in Stephen himself with his whole Agenbite of Inwit that keeps coming back. This pang of conscience, which is a sort of archetype of the fact that humanity is at once in need of ground and at the same time in need of change. And Joyce sees that in the novel here. And thinking about whether or not Ulysses is a novel, many have contested that it's not really a novel, or that it is the death of the novel or the last novel because of the extent to which he focuses on the nature of artifice. And we can really see that one of the key, you mentioned parody earlier, and this spirit of parody brings with it the ability to confront the fact that artifice is a part of our lives, and that in fact the need, the sort of fundamental human need that is being expressed in Ulysses is not the need for a solution, but the need for artifice and the need for story and things like that. Um, and I really like this. This is actually William Burroughs. It's not Joyce at all. But he writes in a letter to Allen Ginsberg, "Why do I always parody? Neither in life nor in writing can I achieve complete sincerity except in parody and moments of profound discouragement." And I think that is really what Joyce is doing, is trying to live in that discouragement. And what is he discouraged with? Well, for one, he's discouraged with scholasticism and with orthodoxy. There's this part, it's around line 80 in Scylla and Charybdis, where he's basically critiquing the sort of vagaries of Platonistic, high scholastic, metaphysic kind of conceptions. He says, unsheathe your dagger definitions. Hoarseness is the whatness of all horse. Streams of tendency in aeons they worship. God, noise in the street. Very peripatetic. Space, what you damn well have to see. Through spaces smaller than red globules of man's blood, they creepy crawl after Blake's buttocks into eternity, of which this vegetable world is but a shadow. Hold to the now, the here, through which all future plunges to the past. What is he saying? Basically, all possibilities here, right? The future of what could be becomes the past, becomes something that we have already subsumed under us because we are achieving something greater in the now by striving, by basically unsheathing, by demystifying the vagaries of formalized definitions, such as this hoarseness is the whatness of all horse. It almost rings like a tautology, like it's not really saying anything except hoarseness is hoarseness, or hoarseness is the thing common to all horses. It's like a Platonism, like a theory of the forms kind of thing. And he says later, this is around line 350, a sort of similar thing, critiquing this high-minded idealism of people who are unwilling to take parody seriously in their conceptions of the world, because we're making a theory here. He says, coffined thoughts around me in mummy cases, embalmed in spice of words. Thoth, god of libraries, a bird god, moony crowned. And I heard the voice of that Egyptian high priest in painted chambers loaded with title books. They are still, right? They're stultified. They don't do anything without us reading them. Once quick in the brains of men, still but an itch of death is in them, to tell me in my ear a maudlin tale, urge me to wreak their will. Right? So artifice speaks to Stephen. He is one who is empowered by art, but doesn't have the proper sort of conceptual scheme, the right framework through which to use that. Yeah, go ahead, Vlad.
Yeah, I thought about this like the world of ideas, the world of Plato's ideas, and even Kant's thing in itself is completely immobile. You
Yeah.
know, words do not capture movement. I think this is it.
Mm,
That's why he doesn't believe in his theories. It's
yeah.
because they do not refer finally to life somehow.
Mm, yeah. Because I mean, as soon as he's made the theory, well, it becomes an instrument of his social standing, because he is in part saying this to show his artistic adeptness, his intellectual ability. So in part, this is all kind of a ruse. And in a way, I think Joyce is trying to say that all thought is a ruse in some way, insofar as all thought must pass, all entities must die. And that doesn't mean that it's not important, but it does mean that we have to sort of temper our claims of what are our theories able to encapsulate. And this, the sort of real Hamlet beyond the theory is basically something Stephen has to give up, partly because he admits that, look, I am making up Hamlet. I am making my own forefathers such that I am their father, that I imbue them with the significance that I make of them, precisely because the past is artifice in a way. So there's a lot of sort of bending backwards to try to reshape what do we think that art is capable of doing.
Yeah, it seems like there's two opposing and at the same time not canceling themselves out. Like between these, you actually enrich the world when you create, but at the same time, there is some kind of, like you said in the passage you just quoted, some kind of death inherent in words in some way that they when you name things, you hold on to the name somehow, And life is this ever changing, like nothing is here, which was just the moment before. And I think this is the tension, right?
Yeah.
In the book, like how do you? I don't know. This thing of the father. You create life that isn't, and somehow dies, or I don't know. Is it like I think he's trying to demolish this idea that things are meant to last, like
Yeah.
the art is I don't know, some kind of monument,
Yeah.
which lasts for millennia. Is it?
Yeah.
Am I on the right track? I don't know.
I think so. I think Stephen would like to have the infinite artwork. He would like to have something like Mallarmé's Livre, the book of all books. He would love to make something like that. But I think that Stephen knows that's not really something he can believe in anymore. That's a bit too dogmatic. And by the way, the meeting timer will shut us off in less than a minute, and we'll just come right back on. So don't be alarmed if and when that does happen. But yeah, Vlad, I think he wants this faith in art to be able to transcend the moment, to remake the past and shape the future. But it doesn't seem that he is wholly convinced that he has the ground upon which to stand to make universal claims about art.
I don't know if Joyce arrives at this conclusion consciously. I think perhaps that he does, but um, aside from Ulysses being about artifice, I think it is entirely a book about consciousness and
Mhm.
perspective. He attempted to chronicle in a way that no other person had up to that point the inner workings of the mind
Mhm.
in a documentarian kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think that the place Joyce sees for art and artifice is in its direct effect upon the experience of life.
Mhm.
Um, you look at a chapter like Cyclops, and the whole idea of a Cyclops being able to only see through one eye also is analogous to the idea of seeing through one parody at a
Yeah.
time. In other words, seeing through one form of prose, seeing through one style at a time.
Yeah.
And I think that the idea is art is applied directly to life through the influence of subjectivity and perspective and storytelling and how it shapes our experience of an idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Christopher.
Yeah. On this thing about perspective too, I think it's also Joyce's way of kind of almost looking at different versions of himself. I think a lot of the Shakespeare portion and so like my page 213 where he runs through, day after day we walk through ourselves, meeting robbers, ghosts, giants, old men, young men, etc., etc. But always meeting ourselves, playwright who wrote the folly of the world and wrote it badly. Gave us light first and sun 2 days later. Lord of things as they are whom the most Roman of Catholics, etc. Hangman God, doubtless all in all, and all of us, ostler and butcher, and would be bought and cuckolded too, but in that economy of heaven foretold, there are no more marriages, glorified men, an androgynous angel being a wife unto himself. I think he really sees like the maybe this novel or maybe the novel as a whole is like a chance for self-realization again, like to this father of the father, the artist of themselves.
Yeah.
Through books we can just become like so many different people, and maybe like with the writer like Shakespeare, this is his sort of archetype for what you can do for expressing different versions of yourself. I mean, it is, one person writing these works. How can one mind project so many others that are so convincingly different from their own?
Yeah.
I had a
Yeah.
question about the placement of Scylla and Charybdis. I think Scylla is the dragon, Charybdis is the whirlpool.
Yeah, I
I've
think
always
so.
been vague. I need to like research which one is associated with which, and I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts as to why one is more dogmatic materialist and the other one's like Platonic mysticism.
Yeah, I wrote that down at the end of my chapter. Yeah. Yeah, so Scylla, I think is Stephen, Charybdis is Mulligan, and Bloom is Odysseus,
Hmm.
I think. Because Bloom is sort of indirectly Stephen's way out of this, because by the time um he gets near the end of the chapter, he starts talking about the middle over and over. This is like around line 1000. He says, it doubles itself in the middle of his life, reflects itself in another, repeats itself, protasis, epitasis, catastasis, catastrophe. Gosh, a lot of weird words. It repeats itself again, blah, 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 blah. An original sin and like original sin committed by another in whose sin he too has sinned. It is between the lines of his last written words. And he says later, the truth is midway. He is Ghost and the Prince. He is all in all. Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Blair. I feel like you're gonna bounce off me here.
Um, Somewhat, yeah. This is another thing that I noticed on this reread that I had never realized before. There's this quote that Stephen cites, which is, if Socrates leave his house today, you will find the sage seated on his doorsteps. And just a little bit later, Stephen is exiting the library. On the doorstep, that's when Bloom passes between them.
Hmm.
And we talk about the dream that Stephen had flying as a bird and kind of whatever whatever that meant to him. It seemed that the dream had an almost prophetic kind of quality, which if you know like Joyce's history, he was kind of superstitious in that way and did have these really interesting synchronicities in his life that I think he wanted to represent through Stephen's dream as well.
Yeah.
But I believe that Bloom was foreshadowed in that, and that's sort of part of the pulling out of this sphere of literary people into Bloom, who represents again a more kind of direct, affirmative, less self-conscious way of experiencing life.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, I think this idea of self-consciousness, and Blair, you pointed this out earlier, with perception and stuff like that. In many ways, I'm often tempted to read Ulysses as a Hegelian because it's always obsessed. I mean, he literally talks about dialectics in this Scylla and Charybdis chapter, where he's basically, trying to find this midpoint between two extremes. So in many ways, this is the golden mean that Aristotle talks about. But there's also this constant search for this sort of romantic philosophy, self-consciousness, this freeing of the bonds of consciousness to be unable to transcend the moment. And yet Stevens sort of gives a alternate, I don't know what school this would be, but he laughed to free his mind from his mind's bondage. So he brings in humor, and this is doubtless the reason why he relies on parody so much. And um, the very obvious surface of artifice that coats this book, he uses that to free our minds too of their preconceptions. This is a sort of like the consciousness raising that feminists do, where they basically reveal that there are a whole panoply of assumptions that we bring that are influencing the way that we view things. And by expanding one's consciousness, you are able to reorient the way that you view those things and get a more variegated account. And not only more variegated, it's it's more blind. Stephen says, what links them in nature? An instant of blind rut. So there's a sort of absurdism that he's trying to advocate here too. And he talks later about the the two rages commingle in a whirlpool. So we have another figure of kind of chaos, of wanton excess beyond the pales of thought. And yet at the same time, this book is like the stream of consciousness book that's all about thought and all about consciousness and perception. So it's sort of how to make the uncognizable cognizable or how to make the unexperienceable experienceable. It's definitely an enduring series of problems.
Another thing, yeah, based on what you just said, that's really interesting is that something I kind of didn't really think about before, and this is not a total, um, this is not like 100%, but you kind of get the sense that Bloom lives a little bit more in the present, while
Yeah.
Stephen is very much concerned with the past and with awakening from history, right?
Yeah.
That's his whole thing. He's stuck in the words of all these dead authors, dead words, and he wants to find what is true and significant about life.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I mean,
you
ultimately,
see
Bloom is the
what you say?
pragmatic man, right? Ultimately,
Yeah,
Bloom is the one who's concerned with daily affairs, whereas Stephen is basically consumed by this guilt over his now dead mother, about the past of Ireland and what to do with that now.
We
very
think
much so.
we
You
think
kind of have
about
the all in all
oh, go
from,
ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Solomon. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sol's fine. We think about uh Bloom. Sorry, we think about Stephen as like a younger Joyce, and um it's an association which is used quite a lot. But how if Bloom? I think we mentioned before about um how much of Joyce is in Bloom and how much is he. I'm just thinking about what you were just chatting with about, to be
Hmm.
honest, and um
Yeah.
how how much was he Bloom, or was he still Stephen, or do we just say that Stephen is his more naive, younger self?
Hmm. Yeah. I definitely don't think it is an easy. I think part of this book is kind of questioning binaries, especially in Scylla and Charybdis as they mix into
Yeah,
this whirlpool. Um, yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind that is only tangentially in support of a Bloomian kind of connection, um, during the course of writing what would become Finnegan's Wake, he had several moments where he basically just had to publish something to get some money to put food on the table, and he basically had to kind of scrap together, what he'd been working on and just publish it, even though he knew it was only a work in progress and only a piece of a work in progress. And he would, play with the size of the print run and the color of the boards on the outside of the book. And he did this famous reading of Finnegan's Wake as a publicity stunt in part. So I think there is some of that practical tarrying in Joyce, maybe, but I mean, I tend to certainly equate him more with Stephen than with Bloom, but I think Bloom is also the everyman foil of Joyce, and that's Joyce kind of acknowledging his limitations as an artist. Uh, who does he
there
need?
must be so much Bloom because you couldn't feel as deeply and be and act and think and write that down as Bloom's
Yeah.
you know sections without being that person, because they're so deep and so
Hmm.
intimate and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very Whitmanian. He contains multitudes, and I think
Of course, yeah.
I definitely think that Joyce does contain a lot of Bloom.
mm,
Um, and I think that as Joyce advanced through his career, I think that a lot of people do purely associate him with the Stephen or like the Shem character in Finnegan's Wake.
Hmm.
But the longer I've spent with Finnegan's Wake too, the more I start to feel actually that he is really not just casting himself into the Shem character, but into the Sean,
Hmm.
into the rest of the characters in the book. Like the all in all idea that we kind of circling around,
Yeah.
it's very much true. You know, I think that if we are each other in any way, it is through the faculty of the mind, through the arts, through the connection over art, and
Yeah.
the ability to try on each other's perspectives and to perhaps discover oneself through that, which Stephen is certainly attempting to do through the works of the authors that he admires. And Bloom, I think, does express at certain points that he is a fan of poetry. Like he likes to read. I think in episode 10, he's purchasing a smut book, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, for Molly. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for Molly. Right,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
but he does I think he mentions more maybe more songs. You know, he's always thinking about
yeah,
different little Italian songs at one part where he's
right. Yeah, that's very true. And that was also a very Joycean thing too, because he would have been a singer
Mhm.
had things gone differently.
Yeah. Yeah, hit it, Christopher.
Yeah, I always felt that this book was him trying to distance himself from Stephen a bit. I feel like a lot of the Stephenisms in this book, the ones that are, seem like similar to the ones in Portrait, are even with grown and exaggeration, and obviously, I think a big portion of Stephen's character, at least after this chapter, you see is how much closer he is to getting to be like his father, Joyce's real world father.
Hmm.
Owing a lot of money and being in debt and and spending it on his drink. And I
Yeah.
feel like that has always been, at least from reading about Joyce, was kind of an omen for him. Like he just say had that reminder all his life growing up, to
Yeah.
avoid becoming like his father. So I think Stephen almost represents somewhat a what could have been, I think,
Yeah.
for Joyce in a lot of ways. But he couldn't write, Stephen and Ulysses or probably write anything with himself being the Grace Hopper as Shem in Finnegan's Wake,
Hmm.
without necessarily identifying with finding a life in the books you read. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, I feel like he was what 41 when he wrote Ulysses, and a big part of this, I think, is his the last like 8 years of writing a given book and looking back over
Hmm.
what he was. I think the line in Scylla is the man in Act One, the boy in Act One becomes the man in Act Five, and he's referring to Hamlet. But I always read that line as very literal, talking
Hmm.
about even becoming Bloom, and that perhaps these are just two sides of the same person writing it instead of two wholly distinct people.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, your your little you said, two parts of the shame person instead of same, but shame is actually quite fitting here because Bloom puts a lot of shame on himself as a failed father. And I think that is something Joyce becomes more and more conscious of. And I mean, you're right, Blair. The more I read Finnegan's Wake, I see Joyce embodied in the Sean HCE Bloom sort of character of, I mean, we know biographically speaking that oftentimes Joyce's family would go hungry while he would take their remaining money and go to the opera for the night or get their piano tuned rather than them buy food because he was so insistent, in a Steven sort of way about his ideals, but that turns him into this sort of, I don't want to necessarily say deadbeat. I don't think Joyce is a deadbeat, but deadbeat father kind of archetype that in many ways Bloom is struggling with amongst himself.
I would love to give a little bit of I want to give love to Nausicaa or chapter 13 because we
Please,
haven't even touched
I was
upon it
gonna
yet.
I was gonna call on you and be like, can you just kind of drop us some wisdom there?
Yeah. Well, it does kind of function perfectly in the idea of how art, uh, an artifice applies to life, because
Mhm.
we have the entire section at the beginning, which is a very like obvious parody of idealistic romantic type writing at that
Mhm.
time. which we can assume, and I believe Joyce at some point even outwardly stated to a friend, was all in Bloom's mind. I
Mm,
think it's interesting if you read that also from Gertie McDowell's perspective, but I think that Joyce perhaps did intend for that to be Bloom's projection upon her,
mm,
projection of like a pristine,
mm.
beautiful, perfect young girl. Um, and
And
again,
it might even be
go
a sort
ahead.
of double consciousness thing of
Yeah,
Gertie is made because she lives in a patriarchal society to view
yes.
herself through the lenses of these discourses of magazines and novelettes and
Mhm.
whatnot.
That is, yes, super true. Um, yeah, how that impacts again the contrast between the romantic writing and then the very candid, stark inner monologue of Bloom is so funny. That this is my favorite chapter in the book. Like I
Mm,
love the dreamlike writing as he gets closer and closer to sleep. I think it's really beautiful. And just as a quick anecdote, when I first picked up Ulysses, I knew it was like a really crazy book, but I didn't have a sense of the narrative.
mm,
So I bought it and I literally just went to random pages and like saw what I felt from the writing itself without the context.
mm.
And this chapter always stuck out to me as having particularly beautiful writing. And I really embraced the book as just complete dream logic without without an underlying narrative, which is
Mm.
funny because it's actually one of the most rigorous, detail-oriented narratives of any book I think that's ever been written.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I
it's
totally agree, Blair, about the how beautiful the language is in this chapter. And the first time I read it, I it's you think it's challenging when you start reading it, and then it gives enough to you that it encourages you to carry on, and you think you're making small victories, particularly with the in the printing office.
yeah.
But and you think, oh, that's a good challenge and read, and then it hits you with this. This is like the love letter of like really kind of beautiful writing before it kind of starts to go quite psychedelic, which I love as well. But like when it really starts to throw you, try and rock you and throw you off. But go ahead, Vlad, if you want to say something.
Yeah, so about this dream logic, and at the same time, really meticulous. I think actually Joyce certainly read Freud, certainly read the interpretations of dreams, because what Freud discovers is that actually dreams do have the same kind of waking logic that we do, or even the other way around. It's correct either way. It's
Yeah.
like he says at some point that the desires of the day are also the desires of the one who dreams, and so on. So dreams are actually more structured than we
Mm.
think. Like they reveal the same desires. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I, I think Joyce is trying to navigate this line, maybe.
Yeah, because I mean, we get a sort of cyclical underbelly of the masculinist discourse of Scylla and Charybdis. This was all men talking amongst each other, and then in Nausicaa, it's sort of interesting because in one sense, we get the woman talking about herself because for really the first time in the book, a woman is taking an extremely prominent role, especially in the confines of this chapter. And yet it's also still men talking about women because you think about all the fantasies that Gertie is expressing about the man that she will one day marry and whatnot. Um, it is through the lens of a lot of patriarchal values. And this, in a roundabout way, I mean, I like, Blair, that you brought up that this could be from Bloom's perspective because I always assumed it was from Gertie's perspective. But it coming from Bloom's perspective makes more sense, or maybe if it's a sort of mix of the two in one kind of ambient environment, because we come back to this cyclical theme of meeting ourselves. He says this is around line 1100. He says, "Curious, she an only child, I an only child. So it returns. Think you're escaping and run into yourself. Longest way round is the shortest way home. And just when he and she, circus horse walking in a ring, Rip Van Winkle we played. Rip, tear in Henny Doyle's overcoat. Van, bread van delivering. Winkle, cockles and periwinkles. Then I did Rip Van Winkle coming back. She leaned on the sideboard watching, Moorish eyes, 20 years asleep in Sleepy Hollow, all changed, forgotten, the young are old, his gun rusty from the dew. So this becomes a way for Bloom to reflect on himself. Gertie basically becomes Molly here, right? These Moorish eyes, because Molly is from Gibraltar, which is right next to Morocco, and this gun Rusty from the Dew, right, is his weary knob post act. Also at the end of his marriage, what he has left. So there is this cyclical way of him once again coming back to himself, but through a new kind of discursive lens.
Yeah, I really love that quote. Again, actually, it's funny because I do like the beautiful writing in the first half, but it is second half is Bloom's inner monologue. I find the most beautiful
Mm,
piece of writing in the book.
mhm,
Again, maybe that's just because I really love very dreamlike writing. And I
mm,
wanted to point us to the end of the chat because there is an interesting moment where Bloom um, writes something in the sand and doesn't finish it, which is really fun. And then it
mm,
it leads into the ending. Which when I first read this, I thought, wow, this is so beautiful and poetic without the context. But then in the context of the story, it's really fun where he's
mm.
like falling asleep and he's thinking cuckoo, 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 both him as a cuckold, but
Yeah.
also like the cuckoo clock and that's nearby. So
Mm.
fun.
That's
Joyce
great.
is insane for this book.
That's great because I never even really caught on to this. Mr. Bloom effaced the letters with his slow boot. Hopeless things, sand, nothing grows in it, all fades. This is giving Anakin Skywalker, I hate sand. It gets
Oh my
everywhere.
gosh, yes. Yes.
But but it also right Jesus writing in the sand when the whoever is without sin among you may cast the first stone, and he writes something in the sand and we don't actually know what he wrote in the sand, so maybe there's a an allusion there.
Oh wow, I had no
Hmm.
idea about that.
That's really good.
I do
I
think
see
that
it as just
oh,
like
go ahead.
a joke. I see it as a joke as well because it's like I am and it's a stick in the mud.
That's a
And that
great
is
point.
that
Yeah,
is
yeah.
referred back to as Bloom is called that probably by Molly, I think it is.
Yeah,
And it's just a joke, really. It doesn't really mean much, I suppose. It just because he
yeah,
isn't really a stick in the mud. Bloom is a good guy, you know.
yeah.
I think it's that too, and I mean, with Joyce, every line has multiple ways that he definitely would have thought it could be interpreted. And people have like wrestled over what Bloom could have been saying here, and I think that any answer is probably valid, but I think that the point that there's no resolution and it's just I am a and then it
Mm,
just I think that's perfectly in the spirit of Ulysses for it to be
mm.
that.
Well, I
I
mean,
think that's a meta statement in and of itself.
yeah, because Joyce, and especially by the time we get to Finnegan's Wake, I think he is engaged in a concerted effort to do away with the definite article, right? The truth, the interpretation, or whatever, and moving towards the indefinite article, that this is just a instance or an instance of whatever. And he's basically saying, no, I am not the God, I am a person. That God is dead in this, in a sense. Yeah, Christopher.
Talking about imagination earlier, I was thinking about also how this mind of let's say it's Gertie herself. I think this could also be an interesting kind of contrast to what really like imaginative mind of like Stevens could be.
Mm,
Um, Something a bit more common or earthly or humble in a way.
mm,
And Stephen being a bit more lofty or high-minded.
mhm,
Um, I I guess he could be Bloom the whole time, but um, it would probably make sense where it leads up to his own like climax, and then once that happens with the quote unquote fireworks, then he just snaps out of it. Where it's this kind of big buildup, which I haven't thought of that before. I was
yeah.
going to point out that the dream language, I also think, or how dreamy the book becomes, uh, basically from Scylla onward, I think is I don't know what time of day it is after Scylla. Is it what, 3, 4 p.m. with Nausicaa? I thought it was like the sun setting by the time it was Nausicaa.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
I think this is almost like a weird like kind of preamble to what he's trying to devise with like the wake, in that
I think
like
you're
just
right.
as the day gets long and the mind becomes more weary,
Yeah.
there's just a less of a conscious attention to like the physical surroundings. I mean, even Bloom, I think, succumbs to this. When I was reading Oxen, if I could be allowed to look
Oh
just a
yeah.
bit forward,
Yeah.
my favorite, I think, prose in the whole book is right. Or was this Stephen actually? I could be wrong. I think it might be.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's
If
the
it's the
one with
same
the
section.
light. It's where he's at the table and ooh, just trying to find it.
You're
Is
good,
it the
man. Take your
Um,
one
time.
with the like celestial language kind of?
I think so, yeah. Um,
Because I loved that. I love that part too. If it's, I mean, there is.
you guys can be. I'm gonna look for it. You guys can be free to if you have any. If
Okay.
anybody wants to chat, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna look for a sec.
Um, this is probably not anything, honestly, but I just wanted to point it out because I thought it was fun and
Yeah.
interesting. In Nausicaa, he talks a lot about color, the rainbow,
Hmm.
and mentions
Hmm.
heliotrope here. Um,
Oh, wait,
in
does
relationship,
he say heliotrope in this chapter?
he does, yeah. He says, well, let me see. Yes, that's her perfume. Why she waved her hand. I leave you this to think of me when I'm far away on the pillow. What is it? Heliotrope? No, hyacinth? Roses, I think. She
Mm,
liked that scent she likes scents of that kind. And then
mm,
the rainbow stuff later. And in Finnegan's Wake, there is a lot to do with girls as sort of
mm.
temptresses
Yeah.
associated with the rainbow, which again, I
Yes.
don't know if this is foreshadowing or if this is just something that lived in Joyce's subconscious, but it's
Dude,
interesting.
that's the weird dialectic that I'm in is as I go back to it, especially Cersei. I'm like, holy shit, it's like pre-Finnegan's Wake in more ways than I can just chalk up to a sort of innocent happenstance. So the foreshadowing of the Rainbow Girls in Finnegan's Wake is certainly not out of the question. Yeah, I can't believe I never noticed the heliotrope.
I know. I mean, it's just such a thick and dense and long book
Yeah.
that there is a lot that you skim over. I mean, um, especially because for me, I don't really engage with this book a whole lot for the plot.
Yeah.
Despite there being a lot of really great stuff within the plot, I'm
Mm.
most interested in the writing itself and the experience of the beauty or the ridiculousness of the words. I think from day one, I was never hugely interested in parsing a plot, but I just picked it up over time. You know, the
Yeah.
writing is just in
Yeah.
and of itself so fun.
Yeah.
I have the scene. I'm pretty sure this is Bloom because throughout the table sitting in Oxen,
Mm.
he's always labeled as an outcast. Even when it gets into the different styles, it says "and the wanderer" or in the outsider. And here it says the stranger. So I'm assuming this is Bloom because he's always being pinned as a stranger. The
Mm.
stranger still regarded on the face before him, I'm guessing it's Stephen's, a slow recession of that false calm there imposed as it seemed by habit, or some studied trick upon words so embittered as to accuse in their speaker an unhealthiness, a flair for the cruder things of life. A scene disengages itself, and the observer's memory evoked, it would seem, by a word of so natural a homeliness, as if those days were really present there, as some thought with their immediate pleasures. A shaven space of lawn one soft May evening, the well-remembered grove of lilacs had round town, purple and white, fragrant, slender spectators of the game, but with much real interest in the pellets, as they run slowly forward over the sward or collide and stop, one by its fellow with a brief alert shock, and yonder about that gray urn where the water moves at times in thoughtful irrigation, you saw another as fragrant sisterhood, flowy, Atty, tiny, and their darker friend. If I know not what of a resting in her pose then, Our Lady of the Cherries, a comely brace of them pendant from an ear, bringing out the foreign warmth of the skin so daintily against the cool, ardent fruit, a lad of 4 or 5 in linsey woolsey, blossom time, but there will be cheer in the kindly hearth, when ere long the bowels are gathered and hunched, is standing on the urn secured by that circle of girlish fond hands. He frowns a little, just as this young man does now, with a perhaps too conscious enjoyment of danger, but must needs glance at whiles towards where his mother watches from the piazzetta, giving upon the flower close, with a faint shadow of remoteness or of reproach. Alles vergängliche in her glad look.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
and just
Beautiful. What a great passage.
yeah, just like
I,
this sort of like he's just daydreaming, and that to me is like this whole kind of like voyeur staring out from the on this like kind of gang of a sisterhood,
Mm,
very much Wakian.
mm,
I was thinking of book two,
mm.
the outside section. I think chapter two, book two, Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah, the
oh,
night.
that's chapter
Um,
two. Sorry, that's book two, chapter one. I love that section. It's one of
oh,
my
it is
favorites
book.
also.
You're right. It is chapter one. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Um, but yeah, just on this like kind of like language. Um, sort of line of Ulysses, it does feel like it exponentially sort of careens up. And even if Cersei is the climax, I mean, it still holds its own, I think. Eumaeus,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, being almost a very weirdly like someone took a photograph of a photograph. Like if you took
It's a
Bloom
perfect description.
if you took
Yeah.
like Bloom and he wrote his own like section, that's what it like reads like to me. It's like if Bloom
Yeah.
was writing, basically, he like wrestled the pen from Joyce or whomever was like in charge of 17. That's
Yeah.
what I think of. I think it's like somebody framing themselves. It's like a dual like
Mm.
layer there.
Yeah. Yeah. And just as we because we've got 5 minutes left before the timer kicks us off, and that'll probably be a nice place to pause for now. I know there's never a good time to pause when you have like over 100 pages of reading to talk about. But as we move forward, next week we're doing my two favorite chapters of the book, Oxen of the Sun and Circe. Circe's the big long play, but I think you will find it enjoyable. And I want to, I've been thinking as we've been talking about consciousness and, different perspectives and whatnot, especially by the time we get to Nausicaa, I think we realize the inadequacy of talking about individual sort of characters and personalities, and we need to start talking about discourse more. We need to sort of talk about what are the framing techniques being used to give us what is talked about and what is being expressed in the narrative. And this is something that Joyce is basically going to mount to the nth degree in these next few chapters, is this effacement of the idea of the solitary individual who uses language or discourse as a tool that is derivative or secondary. I think Joyce wants to argue that we are, we're on the same level and the same plane as our language, and we are implicated in the ways we use our language. And in Oxen of the Sun, we're basically going to be getting a sort of mock evolution of the English language in style. A little bit, actually, no, not really in terms of the lexicon. It's still we're not using Old English words really. To an extent we are, but it's basically a stylistic evolution of the English language. And then Circe is our big bad phantasmagoric nightmare play. But I want you to focus on these aspects of discourse that are going to be shaping the way that the characters interact in such a way. Yeah, Circe the Inferno for real. Um, in such a way that it's hard to talk about individual characters experiencing things as individuals, especially by the time we get to Circe. We're getting this sense of a sort of collective consciousness. I wouldn't exactly stick to that. I certainly think Finnegan's Wake sort of pokes holes in this idea that Joyce is dealing with the collective consciousness, but you get this sense that basically multiple people can be thinking a thought or an atmosphere or an idea at the same time. And that is going to sort of, you're going to find it's more and more difficult to tell who is saying what, who is experiencing what, who is writing what. But I implore you to enjoy these next two chapters, and especially in Oxen, just let the language take you forth. Um, it's one of the more incomprehensible chapters, especially the last like two paragraphs, which is this wildly frivolous contemporary English slang from a variety of English-speaking dialects and patois and pidgin languages and all this. It's very difficult to understand. I suggest you and I will post the audiobook for Oxen of the Sun in the Google Classroom because I highly recommend, at least for those last few paragraphs, that you read or listen to the audiobook alongside because a lot of the pronunciation rules are particular to dialects that I and probably you do not speak. And it really helps to have I found this rather nice recording of it that I think will help kind of um, help you get your head around what's going on. So yeah, I think that's all my spiel. Anything?
I loved the last couple of pages of Oxen. Actually, funnily enough, they're some of the more parsable sections of Oxen for
Mm,
me.
yeah. Hey, I applaud you.
This is so fun. Are you going to do a Finnegan's Wake group at some point?
Yeah, Christopher has been
Oh my
continually
gosh.
putting that thought in there, and I've been like, yeah, okay, I guess if you make me.
Can you do a video if not, because this is probably going to take forever. We need a video on the math, the night lessons chapter of that book because I have been going back to it and I am obsessed. It is probably the most impressive for me, like piece of writing, I think, in the
Yeah,
entire book. It's so good.
it's so wild, and I mean, there's a reason that Arno Schmidt's Zetlitz Traum is basically a riff on that chapter. So we'll definitely talk about that some more.
I think the
So
last page of it is also insane. There's a really, if you guys haven't heard of the suspended sentence,
yeah, I love
I
that.
have. Yeah.
that guy's whole uh page on just the last on the last page of book two, chapter two is
Yeah,
insane. Like the amount of stuff that he just pulls out of that,
yeah.
it blew my mind.
All right,
Yeah,
it's
it's
about to
amazing.
kick us off, so I will see y'all in 1 week. I hope y'all have a great Christmas if you celebrate, and if not, a good week.
Here's
Cheers.